You'd be glad to hear I'm not going to do a teaching session on hydration. I'm not going to teach a granny how to suck eggs. I'm just going to share some of the rationale for a piece of NHS England national team-led hydration improvement work. And I'll share what that looks like from my region's perspective and some of the spin-off work we're doing as a result of that. And hopefully I'll do all that sufficiently quickly enough so you can get away on time. Other than being a regional IPC improvement advisor for the North Eastern Yorkshire and doing a little bit of work for one of our ICBs, I've got no other declarations. So hydration, it's pretty simple really, isn't it? It's you drink when you're thirsty, you wee lots of it back out, and then you repeat. So I also do a bit of running, and when I feel thirsty out on a longer run, I'll take a drink. Or if it's a shorter run, I'll have a drink when I come home. If I don't do that, I feel a bit rubbish. If I don't go for a run, I don't feel that I need to drink quite as much. If I have a few sherries tonight at the gala dinner and don't mix that with water, I'll feel a bit rubbish in the morning until I fill up again with fluid. So it's pretty simple. But whilst I'm not quite old enough to receive the Age UK emails, I am aware that increasingly I do have to get up in the night for a wee. And on occasion I might consciously not have that later evening cup of tea. And my old gran used to say, I'll just have half a cup, dear, when offered a cup of tea, because with her dodgy knees, you know, love, it would take her a while to get out of the chair and get to the loo during the day. So in hindsight, hydration might not be as simple as some of us think it is when we're in our younger years. And as Age UK recognise, there's a host of challenges as we get older around hydration. Most of you will have seen this or similar graphics. Nationally increasing numbers of E. coli bloodstream infections, distributed differently across the country, and of the greatest impact in the elderly, both those in hospital but also importantly those living in the wider community and in communities in the most socially deprived areas. Of course, we get excited about the gram-negative bloodstream infections due to the prescribing and resistancy challenges of those particular bacteria types and the difficulties of doing good stewardship. And in the North Eastern Yorkshire region in particular, we get more excited because all of our 4 individual ICBs and the majority of areas within those ICBs are the highest prescribers of antimicrobials and generally have the highest numbers of gram-negative bloodstream infections nationally. So again, this is very familiar to most of us in the audience. Now, whether we believe in the achievability of the ambition to have healthcare-associated gram-negative bloodstream infections by next year, we can all agree that reducing the numbers of infections needing antimicrobial therapy can only be good. I suppose most of us working in infection control, most of these bullets are very familiar to us, but I'm not sure if 10 or even 5 years ago that hydration would have been a key topic in a dedicated IPC conference. So let's look at some of the papers around hydration. There's a study here of a population of 140 premenopausal women with recurrent UTI who self-reported to drink less than 1.5 litres of fluid per day. So in that study, the group that drank an additional 1.5 litres a day above that usual intake had a statistically significant reduction in the main number of UTIs and also the number of antimicrobial courses compared to the control group. So, we presume these individuals were young to middle-aged ladies who volunteered to be part of the trial and therefore were likely to understand the purpose of the trial. So it gives us some evidence that increasing fluid intake reduces UTIs and use of antimicrobials, but that learning might not be so applicable to an elderly population, perhaps lacking in cognition or unwilling to increase their intake for any number of reasons, including continence or mobility concerns. Similarly, a study in the British Journal of General Practice, this systematic review, reinforces the benefits of increasing intake to reduce UTI, and the study audience in this review were patients of all ages, not just the elderly. And the comment is that there actually isn't a huge amount of literature to call on on this work. So the questions I'm left with are, how much do we have to drink? And how do I get my old gran to drink enough to stop her feeling rubbish, when her priority is not to wee herself or not to fall over the dog rushing to the toilet? So we've probably all seen these hydration improvement prompts on urinal walls or the backs of toilet doors, depending which sex you are, that ask us to self-assess our own wee colour. And that sort of helps us to regulate our own need to drink more or not. But I would argue these tend to be aimed at either staff or they're in public-facing facilities for people who have the ability to make good decisions for themselves. Public health and media campaigns are really important, but I was interested in these two media outlets, maybe that target a certain demographic, where the 1 to 3 is healthy pee message, you possibly can't see it back there, gets a bit lost in what might be the cause of your purple, bright green, foaming or fizzing wee. So it's something about we need to get the messaging right for the audience. So let's look to some of the more robust information sources. Let's look to what the NICE say about hydration. Not a great deal. The guidance in this area tends to focus on assessing nutritional needs of those in our care, and doesn't really have the same focus on hydration assessment. So this guidance does briefly mention hydration and suggests a fluid intake of 30 to 35 mils per kilogram per day. So for me, that's 2.5 to 3 litres of fluid a day. But again, the focus is on screening for malnutrition using, say, MUST scoring and not dehydration. The only perhaps useful reference is that the assessment needs to be undertaken by somebody with appropriate skills and training. So there is other NICE guidance, which might be more helpful, that does recognise the importance of identifying and addressing both hydration and nutritional needs in older persons with comorbidities, so we get more towards perhaps our target audience. But it doesn't really help with how to do it. You know, what assessments can we use and what interventions are helpful in persuading my old gran to behave differently. Understandably, CQC have thoughts on the matter, and there's been an increasing focus on nutrition and hydration in recent inspections. Certainly some of the trusts in our region have received notice to improve around their nutrition and hydration. Again, the predominant focus has been on nutrition assessment, but some have mentioned the need to enhance hydration monitoring. Some more NICE guidance just published last month recognises that healthcare professionals should be more aware that frail elderly, amongst other groups, need greater support to maintain adequate hydration levels, as they may be unable to do so for themselves. And I think that's an important change in tack. So I'm left with, well, this is a bit no shit Sherlock, isn't it? You know, shouldn't the holistic assessment of our patients involve assessing the hydration needs? Or is there something around the complexity of healthcare in modern times means that we need to specifically focus more on something like hydration? What are the particular flags that we need to emphasise? Final look at the literature. This is quite a nice systematic review, which published a couple of years ago, which looked at studies looking at the impact of interventions to improve hydration in acutely unwell, institutionalised over 65-year-olds, so possibly our target audience. And interestingly, its major finding was that behavioural interventions using verbal prompting and increased availability or choice of drinks were associated with improvements in fluid intake. But again, authors identified there were limited studies to be able to draw these conclusions. And where the studies that were available were of generally poor design and large variations in evaluation. Two projects are probably possibly more aware of that I want to talk about for a few minutes that have used sort of fairly rigorous quality improvement methodologies and showed sustained reductions in UTI-related admissions and UTIs requiring antimicrobials. So this care home work by Katie Lean and the Oxford Academic Health Sciences Network has been quite much lauded. So they gathered good data to identify the problem with increased UTI in care home residents. They ran a variety of tests of change leading to interventions. They started with staff and resident education, and that led on to the implementation of structured drinks rounds, drinks diaries, and generally making hydration fun and relevant to residents and staff. And the second one, led by Jenny Wilson, was similar, but with a focus on the amount of fluid available to residents and addressed the limiting factors such as daily routine, vessel size, and choice of drinks. But what's noticeable from these two studies is that, as well as focusing on staff education and training, they used resident engagement as a tool for increasing compliance. So understanding what residents, liked to drink, or when they preferred to drink, or what they preferred to drink from, were actively sought and acted on. Interventions such as drinks trolleys, mocktails, and making hydration a fun, sociable event were all influential. Excuse me, both of these studies being well written up. I meant to say at the start, when I was sat in the audience earlier, because I forgot my glasses today, I couldn't see the slides too well, but if you think you need these slides, just drop me an email and I'll send them across to you. But I think it's interesting in particular, this study was led by an IPC specialist, and I think it recognises the red thread of IPC in lots of this fundamental aspects of wellness. So finally, let's get on to the reason why I'm here talking. Last year, the National AMR Programme Board committed significant funding to support furthering the knowledge base around interventions and resources that would be more likely to improve hydration in this target group of patients, individuals more likely to develop an E. coli bloodstream infection or urinary tract infection. So the aim of the programme is ultimately to reduce UTIs, which might, as I say, go on to develop to a bloodstream infection, but also about reducing the burden of antimicrobial use. So there were 8 pilot sites chosen nationally from quite a number of submissions. Certainly in the North East and Yorkshire region, we had 9 applications alone that we sifted through. And applications needed to go through a project submission process to examine how robust the proposal was, the likelihood of success, and also to justify the use of public funds. I think the funding element is important. How many of our projects fail because they haven't been sufficiently resourced, staff trying to do some improvement work alongside of their existing roles? And also the funding is for 2 years for the successful pilots to allow sufficient time to test, refine, and spread the learning from the pilot sites. Excuse me. It was important that applicants could demonstrate commitment to the project. So they need to demonstrate a clear stakeholder group, a clear indication of the intervention, and measurable outcomes. And this is an example of one of our successful pilot sites in the North East and Yorkshire. And the stronger proposals also demonstrated good use of quality improvement skills. You know, who doesn't love a good driver diagram? But as we'll see in a second, the successful pilots were broadly split into technological or behavioural interventions. In terms of measuring outcomes, the strategy unit is an analysis and research service, part of the Midlands and Lancashire Commissioning Support Unit. And they've been commissioned to undertake the assessment of the overall programme, including collecting consistent data from the pilot sites, extracting data from the lovely DCS, and undertaking qualitative interviews with users and pilot sites. The final report is due in 2025, but there's a continuous feedback process where regions meet together to share the learning as it arises so it can be spread as quickly as possible. So the 8 funded national hydration pilots are spread across all 7 NHS regions. And as I said, there are a variety of interventions. I don't plan to go through each of them in turn, not at this time of evening. But if you're not aware of the work in your area, try and spot the pilot nearest to you and seek out your regional lead. The national funding included requirement for each region to develop a hydration lead in the region. And the role is to sort of support the share and spread of the pilots and across the region. So if you're not sure who your regional lead is, either find somebody friendly from your NHS England in your patch, or drop me an email on NHSNet and I'll let you know who your lead is. And if you've had a chance to read it, you can see there's a real variety of approach and scope in each of these pilots, but there's consistent data collection across all of the pilots. Just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the 2 in the North East and Yorkshire region. The first pilot is in a set of care homes in Rotherham at South Yorkshire ICB, and that, to a degree, involves replicating the Oxford HSN good hydration work that I described a minute or so ago, focusing on staff training, structured drink rounds, and making that hydration process fun and more interesting. The pilot's been running for 6 months already and is already showing some promising results in terms of reduction in UTIs and less antimicrobial use, accepting though that the numbers are still quite small, so we don't want to over-interpret too early on. And the second regional work in North East Yorkshire is a collaboration between the old Newcastle Gateshead CCG patch and Northumbria University, and that's in the North East and North Cumbria ICB patch. And they're doing a slightly different tack, a 2-part approach. The first is reviewing the literature around hydration education programs and interventions, then working with staff and care home residents to co-design an education package. And in the North East, there's fairly strong recent history of using technology in care home sector to recognise deterioration and enhance care. So it's going to build on some of that learning and some of those successes to deliver training at scale using technology. And the second part of the project is doing the intervention and again measuring the success of that. So this work is more than just the 8 pilot sites. As I said, it comes with some regional funding as well, and in our region we've been able to do some other work. So we've created and facilitated a regional hydration improvement network. We meet monthly. It's only been in place for the last 4 months, but it's already a real mix of clinicians from across the region's organisations. So we have IPC leads, we have dietitians, we have pharmacists, we have ward staff nurses, through to organisation chief nurses. And the monthly meetings are all about sharing resources. This isn't an NHS England assurance process. It's about sharing resources, sharing learning and experiences. We tend to have 1 or 2 key speakers each meeting presenting on their hydration work in their organisation. And we're just starting now to focus on QI methodologies to support development of good ideas through to more robust interventions. We have a future NHS page that currently is an offshoot of our regional IPC page, but in time that will start to be a standalone but linked resource. And then another main strand of work has been developing funding to support small change projects across the region. And in the last year we've supported 17 projects in addition to the 2 national pilots. And these allowed organisations to, for example, to buy a set of different coloured lids to implement a traffic light system in their clinical area, or a variety of vessel sizes rather than those awful NHS pot cups that, Bert the old farmer can't get his finger into the handle. So a variety of vessel sizes to aid compliance. And again, we had an application process for these small bids, not as robust as the national pilot, but they had to demonstrate how that funding would lead to a positive intervention, how it could be expanded across their organisation where appropriate, and came with a requirement to feed back to the regional improvement network as well. So getting towards the end, you'd be glad to hear. So some of the success stories in our part of the world, and I know many of you have been involved in successful interventions, but I just thought, well, I've got the podium, I might as well share some of our successes. So I mentioned the Rotherham Care Home national pilot. The Rotherham Foundation Trust is the acute trust that's in the same locality, and they've undertaken similar work to focus on patient and staff hydration, using traffic light system to identify patients at risk of being underhydrated. And I particularly like this work because it pinched with pride some resources, you probably can't see it in detail here, from another organisation in the region. It also recognised that hydrated staff deliver better care to patients or individuals, and they had a lot of focus on measurement for improvement, which is perhaps where some of our projects fall down historically. And the second piece, I'd like to focus on the West Yorkshire ICB patch that developed this YouTube, very public-facing video about the reasons for improving hydration. And again, it works across language and cultural barriers that we have in some parts of Yorkshire. And the third part is in North Yorkshire, this bit here, which is a co-produced piece between the local authority and the local NHS, and where they were rolling out a training programme to recognise deterioration in the care home population, as I think one of the speakers mentioned this morning. But added on to that about what that means for recognising UTI and preventing urinary tract infection through improving hydration. And again, they've developed a load of resources. In fact, if you go on this website here, you can download all these resources and put your own badge on top if you wish. Lots of good measurement stuff and staff engagement. And as somebody said this morning, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, we do stuff very similar to that. And that's fantastic. There'll be dozens of similar projects. I'm not trying to claim these are unique. But like with many IPC-related interventions, we're pretty rubbish at sharing the work we do. Rather than just saying allowing other people to learn and that sort of pinch with pride. So feel free to nick this stuff and use it elsewhere. And if you've done something similar, tell us all about it and we'll nick it back. So, what's next? So, as I said at the start, there's nothing particularly radical in the stuff that's going on here. It's about identifying, sharing, spreading successful interventions more widely. But I do think there's significant work to do in some organisations, both in my region and nationally, including in our own specialisms of IPC, to embed behavioural change and understand QI methodologies. And to me, it should be a fundamental part of each of our toolkit about how we deliver our role to facilitate safe care. And finally, this is my view of the world. This is not NHS England's view of the world. Is that responsibility for hydration improvement, I believe, currently sits in too many infection control teams' responsibilities. It might be part of your gram-negative reduction work, but I think there's too many IPC teams are feeling forced to take the lead on this. I think it's disappointing that the national hydration improvement work should have to sit with a national AMR programme. To me, hydration assessment and intervention should be taken as seriously as nutrition assessment and as integral to clinical practice and safe care as all the other fundamental cares, mouth care, continence and mobility, for example. And such, I believe that whilst IPC teams need to be involved with organisational programmes of improvement in fundamental nursing care, I don't believe that we should have to lead on these pieces. So finally, thank you to organisations. I'm not sure, I can't see any organisation North East Yorkshire who's here today who's doing some of this work. Thank you very much. Thank you to Esther, who spoke earlier on today, who has been driving a lot of this work from the national team as well. And I'll stop there. So thank you very much for your time.